Hello, my name is Shelby Ch'ng. I'm a Thunder Bay City Council member, and we have started this segment called Frontline Thunder Bay, where I speak with frontline workers to dive into deep issues that are affecting our city. And today we have with us Holly Gauvin from Elevate. So welcome, Holly.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, let's talk about Elevate and what you do. Give us a brief history of, I just touched this plant, of where it came from and kind of where it is today.
All right. Elevate NWO was formerly known as the AIDS Committee of Thunder Bay. That's where we started off in 1985. It was a group of volunteers that organized themselves to support people who were in the hospital dying of AIDS. This group of friends came together and just started doing support that way. In '87, they were able to incorporate. Later on became AIDS Thunder Bay, and eventually we became Elevate. So our role in the community has always been to provide education and community development around HIV, hepatitis C, and harm reduction, and also to provide treatment, care, and support to those who are living with, at risk of, or affected by HIV and hepatitis C. So we're pretty excited to do that work. More recently, about 5 years ago, we took on supporting people who were in homeless encampments, and I think that's why you have me here to talk tonight.
That is exactly why. So let's dive right into it. There was a TB News Watch article that was posted on November 25th. Lee Noonan wrote the article, and the title is "Housing, Not Tents. Elevate Northwest Ontario Breaks Ties with Thunder Bay DSAB." So the DSAB is a Thunder Bay District Social Service Administration Board. They administer Ontario Works, programming, housing for those who are most vulnerable. So in the article, you explain how your staff, when you do outreach, you find people who have passed away in tents. The article says there's been 4. I understand there might be more as of this article. And you wrote a letter to Ontario Minister Paul Calandra asking for an audit on the vacant social housing units in the Thunder Bay District. So can you explain a little bit about the audit and why you've decided to break ties with them?
Right. So for Elevate, we've been supporting homeless encampments for a number of years. We were watching the numbers dramatically climb. This year, it reached 200 people out in the encampment that we were supporting, going out there 5 days a week, bringing them food, bringing them resources that they need to survive in the rough, helping to connect them up with services, helping to get them to appointments, those types of things. And it became really overwhelming. So overwhelming that we were not able to get a lot of the work done that really needed to be done, some of those things that were actually going to be game changers. And we were seeing no movement within the housing side. I believe we got less than 6 people housed all year long.
Wow.
And
that's because the supply side wasn't there.
The supply side wasn't there. So, but we also do know from industry players, so people who have the inside baseball, as it were, around DSAB, that there was over 200 vacant units that are sitting empty right now that are in various states of repair. Some of them may just need cleaning. Some of them may need quite a bit more. And so we've been trying to get at this information for some time, haven't been able to get it. And so we've called on the provincial government because housing is a provincial responsibility. And so we've called on the provincial government to find out exactly how many units are we talking about and what are their plans to address this. What are their plans to get those operational within the next 12 months? Our people are dying on the streets waiting for housing year over year over year. We have grieving ceremonies at Elevate for people that have been lost in the encampments, and still we're not housing enough people. There seems to be a pattern at play here, and this is not an issue with the local DSAB. The local DSAB is following provincial directives as anybody else needs to. Everybody has a boss. But the province seems to be divesting its responsibility around housing into community. So expecting people to stay in shelters, expecting programs like the program that funds us to go out and put tents around people and give people breakfast is the homeless prevention program. There's nothing preventative about what we were doing. All we were doing was caring for people once they're there. And so, so we moved upstream. We've started to advocate, but we knew that we couldn't take money from them at the same time telling them, hey, this isn't okay anymore. We need to move this. We need an audit. We need to see what's available and what you're doing to make this a priority for our community. Our community is just about to embark on a pallet village project, which I fully support and I'm still on board for, but it's a very expensive project. And what taxpayers need to know and what citizens need to know is that there's an exit strategy around this. The only way we get an exit strategy is if there's housing for people to get into at the end of this. And so, yes, we started doing this advocacy work, and we've been getting some very interesting calls and emails and Facebook messages.
Speaking of interesting calls and messages, I've got a few comments, 2 letters to the editor and some Facebook comments that I thought maybe we could talk about. So 1 letter to the editor. You know, I appreciate everybody who writes in, takes the time to write letters to the editor or, you know, keep a conversation going. So one of the pieces in this letter, this is, the person says, this is no enforcement until all issues are fixed mindset. Bears a striking resemblance to some arguments advanced in debates over bail reform, where the suggestion is to avoid holding offenders accountable until every economic and social factor driving criminality is addressed. So
that's the exact opposite of what we're saying. We're saying housing first. Housing now, fix things around after, right?
Right.
So if you look at any kind of recovery process, if you look at anybody getting their life back on track, it always starts in the same place, which is I need a place to live, right? People can't get a lot of things done when they don't have a fixed address. That's just the stark reality of their situation. So yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with this writer. Waiting for the perfect, well, perfect will never come.
Right.
What we need to do is what's the next best and most logical answer? We have housing stock. It needs to be fixed. Let's get that fixed. That's 200 units. So that can house between 200 and 400 people, right? Assuming because there's lots of couples that are out there homeless right now. When you contrast that with our PIC count numbers of 557, that's a huge response to this crisis that we're having in our community. And it completely ends encampment. So we need to see these types of solutions, but we need the province to step up. Right now, all we're seeing is funding for projects that are transition. Everything is transition units. And transition units are wonderful. I have several myself, love the transition units. They help out in the interim. But my question is the same, transition into what? At some point, people need to be housed. So I don't want to be sacrificing permanent housing stock for something that's going to be temporary, because guess what? That's just pushing the problem down the road, right? What we're saying is there's a 2-pronged approach here. Many of my colleagues are starting transitional units and are doing fabulous work within it. And I think that they should continue. But not at the expense of these units. Let's get these units online. It would seem to me that this is the easiest way to fix the housing problems in Thunder Bay. And if I'm wrong, then the audit should point to that, and you know, I'll eat crow.
Right. I was at an AMO conference, which is Association of Municipalities of Ontario, that was held in Ottawa this past year, and I was talking to one of the organizers, or one of the builders of the pallet houses. I was very interested in how they run and what their track records were, and I heard a saying, from tents to taxpayers, and it's a spectrum of people. So we have this housing continuum, so if we could cut off the end of stopping people from living in tents and getting them even into these temporary shelters that are safer, they're heated and they're cooled, which brings me to another comment on Facebook. So this writer puts on Facebook, this is in regards to the McVicker Creek fire that happened. It was quite a large fire. It was 2 blocks from my house, so I did see the smoke. The commenter writes, "This is what can happen with any temporary shelter, including the village that they wish to put up at the city. Human rights is endangering people contrary to what we're told. Enabling attitude is putting people at risk. If not enough housing, then permanent shelter is safest. Stop propaganda about human rights." I just kind of want to get your reaction. And
yeah, I mean, I really wish people would take basic civics to actually understand what human rights are. So few problematic things in that. So first of all, there are no service agencies, myself included, providing heating sources. The heat source you get is a winter tent at this time of year and sleeping bags and extra blankets. That's the heating source. So people are procuring other heating sources.
right. And these pallet shelters have their own heating system.
They have their own heating systems in them, right? Like that's the advantage of them, right? Is that they have heating and cooling systems within them, so they can be actually like sustainable. So right off the out of the gate, the information isn't correct, right?
Right.
I think the story is, though, oh my God, are these people okay, right? Because I can tell you they're not okay. These people are devastated.
Right. Everything they own is in that tent.
It was gone. It was
just
gone.
as traumatic as us losing our house.
Absolutely. And it affected a bunch of people that were living in there, because as it gets colder, more and more people will pack into one tent in order to keep themselves warm. And so it was actually through the quick actions of one of our members who rescued people and put himself at personal risk to get people to safety. And the next day, he sat there just very, very shaken, like the entire day, because he knew that, minutes, everything could have gone the other way, right? That it was just minutes away from being this tragic accident as opposed to this really awful thing that happened. But it could have, his friends could have been lost as a result of this. But yeah, I'm sad to see that there wasn't more concern for the people that are out there. I'm disturbed to hear the references around human rights and just how odd that is.
Yeah, we'll touch on that in a bit, about the human rights, and we'll break down, because there was an announcement today as well from the Ontario government. One last piece, another letter to the editor. This was from December 11th, and this was in TB Newswatch. This commenter writes, "Living in tents in the winter in Northern Ontario is dangerous. There's no way to heat them that is safe." That is very true. These agencies that keep supplying food, fuel, and tents need to stop. They're not helping, they're part of the problem. It's only a matter of time before someone dies of exposure. Then the blame game and finger pointing will start.
Well, blame game has started already.
Right.
As is evidenced by this. I would say that, again, there are no service providers providing fuel sources. Right. We provide tents and we provide blankets and warm jackets and those types of things, whatever we have, but we don't provide fuel sources because of the risks, right? We talk to our people about winter safety. They talk about fuel sources they want to use. We talk about what the danger is with them. Some people listen, some people won't listen, but people are seeking out their own fuel sources because they're desperate.
It's minus 20 out right now.
It's minus 20, yeah. Like it's achingly cold. And so last year we got a lot of comments about, oh, they disappear in the winter. Yeah, you know where they disappeared? They disappeared into apartment buildings, in hallways, and in stairwells, which is also a safety issue.
I've seen pictures. There's one place, I won't say where it is in town, but it's a building. The building owner was quite upset that there were 20 people living in the stairwell, just trying to keep warm. And I know that there is a little bit of funding that comes out this time of year out of the cold programming, but it's not enough. It's not nearly enough.
It isn't. It's actually really amazing what our shelter systems have been able to do to get people out of the cold, but it isn't enough. I mean, 40 new beds were introduced to the system, but at that time we had 100 people out there. Right. So yeah, now we have, we ourselves got a small grant from the federal government in order to stage a hotel intervention. So we took those that were really medically compromised, a lot of senior citizens, a lot of couples, people who are not always well served within the shelter system, and we put them up in the hotel for a few months. Again, that money would be best spent fixing up these units that are empty and getting people actually housed.
Right.
But we still have about 50 people outside for the winter. And they're not going in. They're not going into shelters. They're not getting in anywhere else. They will wander the streets. It's very often that we see people walk around all night, show up at our doorstep first thing in the morning, and come into the warming centers where they'll sleep in chairs or sitting upright or sleep on the couch when they can, and just try to get a little bit of rest and get warmed up enough to go and do it all over again tomorrow night.
Wow. Let's change the focus a little bit. Let's talk about the Ontario bill that actually was announced today that is aimed at ending encampments to strengthen trespass and drug penalties. So the Ontario Premier said that he's willing to use the notwithstanding clause to enact new legislation. The new legislation will give municipalities and police services legal tools to dismantle homeless encampments and crack down on public drug use with fines or jail time. Ford announced the pending legislation at a news conference this Thursday morning, which is today, on the last day before leaving for the winter break, and they're back on March 3rd. So this legislation would allow police officers to ticket or arrest people who use illegal drugs in public, because these are public places still, with penalties up to $10,000 or 6 months in jail. So I know you have some numbers that we've talked about earlier. So let's talk about what this means.
How problematic this is?
Yeah, what it means, and and are there alternatives that maybe we should be lobbying for consideration?
So I think that as a citizen, a voting member of the public, I'm always deeply concerned when I hear our leaders talking about sidestepping judiciary in order to violate human rights. That is a problem. And yes, you may not agree with the human rights of this particular population, but it could just as easily be your human rights down the line. Do you really want to start going down that slippery slope? So I really ask citizens to really think about what it is that we are supporting them to do as leaders. That's not okay. Criminalizing homelessness is not a valid response to the homeless problem.
And Mike Schreiner he said the solution to homelessness is not a jail, and criminalizing homelessness and addictions is actually going to make the problem worse.
It's going to make it considerably worse. And I ask, who does this policy actually benefit? So think about it. It isn't going to help the people who are vulnerable. So they're going to go to jail for a while. They're going to eat 3 squares, be nice and warm, and they're going to get out, and they're still going to be homeless. So they're going to go right back to where they were. It also costs, so I did some quick research today, in 2018 and 19, so this is pre-inflation, 2018, 2019, Stats Canada, it was $302 to incarcerate somebody for a day. So at 6 months, it'll be $55,205 that taxpayers will be bearing the brunt of. So it's not helping taxpayers either. Okay. Housing, social housing, so imagine we're going to subsidize a person, we're going to incarcerate one person, we're going to subsidize completely, 100% subsidize them. To house them for the year would be $16,488. So if you're looking at 2 bills, which bill are you going to choose? And this one actually lands them in a home at the end of this. So you can talk about forcing treatment on people. You can talk about incarceration. You can talk about fining people. At the end of the day, they're still going to be homeless, so they're still going to be somebody's problem, right?
Right.
And so
because those housing supports on the other end after they get released from jail is just not there. And plus they have a $10,000 fine. Up to a $10,000 fine.
And you're talking about people who can't afford a place to live, so how are they going to pay that fine? And none of that takes into account our beleaguered police force, who is already up against it, having to enforce something that is this ridiculous, right? Like, this is not going to change anything. What this will also do is force people into more and more high-risk situations. So instead of seeing people out in the camps, you're going to start to see people sneaking into sheds or garages that get left open or people's cars that get left open, because people will seek warmth where they can.
Right. Another thing that came out was the Auditor General's report. There was TVO Today had a great article written by John Michael McGrath. So Shelley Spence is the Ontario's Auditor General, and one of the things that she points out was that the Ontario opioid strategy is out of date. We had our safe consumption site and our safe supply site closed down due to rules that the Ontario government has introduced. But her report is quite scathing. It says it's badly out of date, and in any case, the government hasn't done a good job in implementing it. Decision of the past August to close many supervised consumption sites was not based on any thorough evidence-based business case analysis, and is also not adequately tracking its own benchmarks or strategy, nor is it adequately monitoring OHIP billing practices from doctors. So instead of people going to a safe consumption site, they are now, many people that serve this, that went to a safe consumption site are homeless. So now they're doing it in their tents, but their tents are on public property, in which case this new act from the Ford government will nab them on doing drugs in public, even though this is now considered their house because it's protected by human rights. So police officers can arrest them, put them into a jail, which also our jail is full and at capacity. A new jail, which is slated to open at the end of 2026, one will not be open in time. And even when it does open, we end up shipping a lot of people from the jail to other jails that have capacity because we're so over capacity here. So it's a very complex problem, and once you follow the thread of what happens, it's quite alarming. What do you think? So I know the Ford government came up with this today, and they're not going to be back until March 3rd. But what do you think is the next? What should we be doing, and what should we be lobbying for?
We need to absolutely fight to keep our supervised consumption open because that supervised consumption site is based and rooted in evidence. Like excellent evidence. Harm reduction works. When we talk harm reduction, people seem to think it's like, oh, you just want people to keep using, and abstinence over here wants everybody to stop. That's not the case. Abstinence is this is the only way. Harm reduction is everything's on the table to reduce the health outcomes, the negative health outcomes that you might experience while you're using. But we have successfully, as a harm reduction organization, gotten many people into abstinence-based treatments because that's what they were ready for at that time. Everything's on the table. So harm reduction works. We should be fighting for our supervised consumption site. We should be fighting to keep that open. We should be fighting to have it better funded. These programs don't go far enough. We have an opioid crisis that continues to escalate, and you're taking away a program that actually has demonstrated it can work. And you're saying that if you want to go to one of these heart hubs, you know, they're going to help you with abstinence. That's great for the small group of people that that's going to work for, but there are, statistically speaking, the vast majority are unwilling, unable to actually get there into that abstinence mind. So you're going to leave all of those people behind. And now his plan is to incarcerate them. Harm reduction is pennies on the dollar. Social housing, pennies on the dollar. Incarceration, again, this is based on math from several years ago, but $55,000, what bill do you want to pay? And at the end of the day, they still come out homeless. And to your point, when they're farmed out to all these communities and all these other facilities around the province, they lose all social contact. They lose all support services that they've, you know, cobbled together. So there's nobody to catch them when they do get out. And so this is hugely problematic. We need to be asking for a greater degree of transparency and accountability around our social housing programs. We need to see what is the housing rate. I would like like to see how many people are housed every month. You know, what's that rate of like the number of people who are applying for housing versus the number of people who are getting housing versus the number of units that we're turning over. Like, I want to see these numbers, and I want help making sense of them, because I'm accountable for what my organization does, and we have to be very transparent in that, and we have to follow evidence-based practices. I would like to see our government doing the same.
Right. I've read an interesting take on this. Was somebody who commented on, I think it was the DEC Foundation's Facebook page. They said, we already have safe consumption and safe supply. We just call it alcohol. And I thought that was really interesting to help people understand that a safe supply of alcohol, so you can't just, you know, make your home brew and sell it on the street, which is essentially what street drugs are. They're made, you know, with in factories and testing so that people don't go blind and don't, you know, lose their liver too soon. So, and then we have these bars and establishments that are licensed and operated that you could go and consume. So the line between what alcohol, and we have alcoholics that, and people who consume alcohol. So it's interesting to see how there's lines drawn between alcohol and illegal drugs.
And it goes even further than that, because illegal drugs wouldn't be a problem if it wasn't happening in a public space. So if you were to go home tonight, or I was to go home tonight and pick your poison, right? Would it be an issue?
Right, and then they wouldn't be arrested because they would be in a private residence.
Because I'm in my own residence, right? And so, yeah, I feel like this is about vilifying the poor, because this makes sense to taxpayers, right? It's like, yep, we should lock them up, we should give them treatment, that sort of thing. But if people are not looking at what the actual price tag is for that. If you can look at these numbers, the 55,000 versus 16.
Stats Canada. 2018.
So, yeah, so if we're looking at those two numbers and you're saying, no, I still want to pay that bill of 55,000 to incarcerate them, then I've got to ask you, what's your motivation?
Right. Okay. And on that note, I think we need to wrap it up, because we're running out of time. It's been lovely, and thank you so much for having this chat with me. It's been very enlightening, and I think we need to get behind a better lobbying strategy to make sure that our citizens are safe and that everybody's taken care of, and it's not going to cost us more than it should.
That's right.
So thank you very much, Holly.
Thank you.